Sorry about that, babe.
What's up, guys? It's Cody, aka the Bear, here with Bits and Glory, and we're back with another Bitscast, aka the Bits and Glory podcast. This is going to be episode 3, as I'm sure you could tell by the title of the video and the layout all around me. We're going to be talking about Zelda II: The Adventure of Link. Quite a bit to get into. Just to give you guys a quick backstory here on how this podcast is going to work is it's going to be similar to the one that I did for Shining in the Darkness, which was episode 2. I'm kind of grabbing bits and pieces here and there. Again, the first one that I did on Final Fantasy on the NES was more of a straight one-to-one walkthrough of the game all the way to the end. I might do that once in a while, but I think it's going to be more so this type of format going forward. I feel like there's a bunch of really interesting stuff to look at, kind of do a little bit of a deeper dive into the game. I have a little checklist to go down, but for the most part I'm kind of winging it again, as always. So hopefully you guys enjoy, but I guess quickly a little bit of background with me and Zelda 2, and as far as the channel goes, for those of you that haven't been paying attention or just found me, I did my first ever full playthrough of Zelda 2. You could check that out. I will link everything that I'm talking about will be linked in the pinned comment or description below. Finished up my first ever full playthrough, I guess probably now about a month ago. And then after that, I did some practice, and then I eventually got it no death. After some practice, it took me 3 recorded attempts to get no death run, which is also up on my channel. A commentary version and a no commentary version for those of you that don't want to hear me talk. I also did an unboxing, which by now should probably be up. I think I'm going to release this last. And we're also going to take a look a little bit here at the box and stuff. There's actually not as much to it as many of the unboxings that have been on my channel. It's not stuffed with charts and maps and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty much just a game, a box, a dust sleeve, and a manual. But still pretty cool to look at nonetheless. So yeah, it's pretty much been my first ever, actual exposure to Zelda 2. Growing up, I played it here and there, but nothing crazy. Was never a big Zelda fan growing up. Still really not. I'm starting to like the series a little bit more as I get older. But I wouldn't say that it's like, oh, it's my Desert Island game or Desert Island series or something like that, you know what I mean? But Zelda 2 has been kind of much maligned. It's tough to explain because I feel like, back in the day, there wasn't too much to compare it against, right? Because you had The Legend of Zelda, and then you had Zelda II: The Adventure of Link at the time. And the games were so completely different. But in saying that, I feel like as time went on and more of the Zelda games pretty much just copied the formula that they laid in the first one, that's when the criticism started coming in, it's the black sheep of the series, this, that, and the other. However, I feel like the majority of the reception for the game across the internet and video game magazines and stuff over the years has been just very up and down, and I feel like it continues to be up and down. We'll get into that a little bit more later. Take a look at a few publications as well as GameFAQs. I actually like using GameFAQs as an example because a lot of the people that did reviews on GameFAQs actually did them in the early 2000s, which is an interesting time period because at that point most of these games have been out 10 to 15 years, and it's like a good retrospective where they were still somewhat fresh, where opposed to nowadays where it's like 30 years old or something like that, roughly off the top of my head. But it's gonna be pretty interesting. So I think to get started, let's go over the story of the game, which will kind of lead into the game box and manual breakdown. So we're gonna read the story from here, and I will put up some excerpts over to the screen's right. Post-production. I was gonna read some recap stories on the interwebs, but I feel like ultimately this stuff is it's the best. So it's gonna be a little bit of reading, and I hate reading because I'm a fucking moron, but we'll get through this as best we can. So, the story of the adventure of Link. At the end of a fierce fight, Link overthrew Ganon, took back the Triforce, and rescued Princess Zelda. However, is it all really finished? Many seasons have passed since then. Hyrule was on the road to ruin. The power that the vile heart of Ganon had left behind was causing chaos and disorder in Hyrule. What's more, even after the fall of Ganon, some of his underlings remained, waiting for Ganon's return. The key to Ganon's return was the blood of Link, the valiant lad who overthrew the King of Evil. Ganon would be revived by sacrificing Link and sprinkling his blood on the ashes of Ganon. Jesus. Meanwhile, That's really dark for, like, Nintendo. This is a family console, man. Meanwhile, Link remained in the little kingdom of Hyrule and lent his hand to its restoration, but circumstances did not look very good. One day, a strange mark, exactly like the crest of the kingdom, appeared on the back of Link's hand as he approached his 16th birthday. The worried Link went to Impa, Princess Zelda's nursemaid, and was shocked and frightened when she saw the birthmark. When she regained her composure, she took Link to the North Castle. There was a door in the North Castle called the Door That Does Not Open. Only the descendants of the Impa family who served the king knew how to open the door. Impa took Link's left hand and pressed the back of it against the door. There was a sound of a lock falling open. The door slowly creaked open, and there on the altar in the middle of the room lay a beautiful woman. "Here lies Princess Zelda," Impa began to speak calmly. "Link, the time has come when I must tell you the legend of Zelda handed down in Hyrule. It is said that long ago, when Hyrule was one country, a great ruler maintained the peace in Hyrule using the Triforce. However, the king was too child of a man and he died. Then the prince of the kingdom should have become the king and inherited everything. But he could inherit the Triforce only in part. The prince searched everywhere for the missing parts but could not find them. Then a magician close to the king brought him some unexpected news. Before he died, the king had said something about the Triforce to only the younger sister of the prince, Princess Zelda. The prince immediately questioned the princess and she wouldn't tell him anything. Some weird writing in here anyway. After the prince, the magician threatened to put the princess into an eternal sleep if she did not talk, but even still, she said nothing. In his anger, the magician tried to cast a magic spell on the princess. The surprised prince tried to stop him, but the magician fought off the prince and went on chanting the spell. Then when the spell was finally cast, Princess Zelda fell on that spot and entered a sleep from which she might never awake. So, at the beginning of the game, you wake up in the palace. Well, you don't wake up, you start in the palace and Princess Zelda's sleeping. There's the backstory. At the same time, the magician also fell down and breathed his last. In his grief, the prince placed the princess in this room. He hoped that someday she would come back to life, so that this tragedy would never be forgotten. He ordered that every female child born into the royal household shall be given the name Zelda. From the stand next to the altar where Princess Zelda lay in a deep sleep, Impa took 6 crystals and a scroll with the same crest and handed them to Link. For generations, my family has handed down these things, which have been set aside for a time when a great king will come. They are written in an ancient script that no one could read now, but you, who have the crest, may be able to read it. It is said that the key to uniting the Triforce is hidden here. Now it is time for you to read it. Link glanced at the scroll, half in doubt, but what do you know? Although he had never seen the letters before, he found that he could read them as if they were talking to him. This was written on the scroll. You who will control the Triforce of the future, I shall hand down to you the secrets of the Triforce. There are 3 kinds of Triforce: power, wisdom, and courage. When these 3 are brought together, the Triforce will show its maximum power. Of the 3, I have left power and wisdom in the kingdom, but the Triforce of courage I have hidden for a reason. Not everybody could use the Triforce. It requires a strong character with no evil thoughts, but an inborn special quality is also necessary. Unfortunately, I have not found such a person in my lifetime. Therefore, I have decided to cast a spell on all of Hyrule. A crest will appear on a young man with that character who has been brought up correctly, has gained many kinds of experiences, and reached a certain age. But what will happen if someone else uses the Triforce before them? If it is misused, it will produce many evils. The Triforce of Courage is hidden in the Great Palace in the Valley of Death on the largest island in Hyrule. However, to enter there, you must first fight the Guardians and undo the binding force. When you've defeated the Guardians, which I made to prevent the enemies from invading 6 palaces in Hyrule, set a crystal in the forehead of the statue you find. When you've set the crystals in all the statues in the 6 palaces, the binding force placed on the Valley of Death will be removed, and you'll be able to enter the Great Palace. There you must fight the last Guardian, and you can obtain the Triforce only by defeating that Guardian. There's nothing to fear. You are the one to get the Triforce. You are the beacon of hope for Hyrule. Impa implored Link, who raised his head slowly after reading the scroll. The magic spell cast upon Princess Zelda will sure to be broken if the Triforce is used. Please, Link, unite the Triforce and save the princess, and bring back peace to Hyrule. Link nodded silently in approval and left the room after taking a long glance at the altar. Then, with a magical sword in his left hand and a magical shield in his right, he set off alone on his long travels. At that time, Ganon's underlings were calling up new allies from the underworld and were beginning to work devilishly towards the revival of Ganon. So, pretty interesting stuff. I feel like that gives a very, very good overview of the story. as well as things that you're about to experience in the game. There is an opening cutscene to the game, but it's obviously not nearly as long as that. Any kind of like general recap that you will find on the interwebs doesn't give you as good as background as that does. So let's kind of unpack that a little bit. Again, I'm not a Zelda lore aficionado, so if there's something wrong, please just let me know. But basically, Princess Zelda was put into a deep sleep, had the curse put upon her. You know, Link obviously had the thing on the back of his hand, the seal that was, I guess, they said, what, passed down through, like the Impa family, Impa race, whatever. So he was pretty much of age and chosen because of the strange mark to kind of, I guess, put together the Triforce, once again, and awake Princess Zelda from her slumber. But the one thing that I thought was pretty interesting was the fact that Impa gave the crystals to Link. So you have to put the 6 crystals into the palaces, and then ultimately that'll break the seal to get to the Great Palace, excuse me. These are like little things that like I've seen, you know what I mean? Like I played through the game and I saw that and kind of, but until it was really laid out in front of me just now I'm like, oh, okay, all this makes a lot more sense now, because I feel like a lot of times, honestly, guys, you could be honest with me. How many of you just kind of play the game? I mean, like, you might read the, you know, watch the opening cutscene and read this a little bit. Does it really sink in? Maybe that's just me. I feel like I don't really learn stuff until after the game, until I really start looking into it. Same goes in movies. I feel like I'll be like, oh, that was really good, and then I'll kind of look it up afterwards, and I'll be like, oh, okay, now this all kind of really makes sense. But, I'm sure that the boss that they were referring to at the Great Palace is probably the Thunderbird, because I feel like Dark Link wasn't foretold in the prophecy. You know what I mean? I feel like that was, but maybe it was, I don't know. I feel like the Thunderbird was probably the one that they were referring to, because you do have to learn the Thunder spell in order to hit the Thunderbird, so I feel like that was the real last enemy until the whole Dark Link extravaganza there at the end. But, pretty cool. The one thing, again, that I wanted to touch on as I'm looking over here at my Spark Notes, the sprinkling of Link's blood on Ganon's ashes will bring Ganon back to life. So Ganon isn't really in Zelda 2, which is pretty interesting. The only time that you see Ganon is actually when you get a game over, right? He's on the end screen. So, interesting stuff. Again, going along with the whole, like, wow, Zelda 2 was such a crazy deviation. I know, granted, you lay Ganon to rest basically at the end of Zelda 1. So, I kind of would have thought that they would have tried to revive him maybe and stick him in here somehow, but it looks like they really didn't, which is interesting. You know, a lot of times games and movies and stuff will take liberties and like be like, let's just bring Ganon back, like somehow Ganon's the last boss, but they actually didn't do that, which I kind of respect. I respect that for sure. So there you go. That's the overview of the story of the game. And like I said, guys, I did an unboxing for Zelda 2, which will be linked. I'll show you guys some stuff real quick. We're not going to go super duper in depth, but I'll also try to pop up some high res things over on the side. It's just always interesting to look at this stuff because, in my opinion, you know what I mean? Like when it comes to retro gaming, it's history at this point. So I'm trying to preserve it and trying to show it off as best as I can. So this is the classic series version of Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, which was a re-release. You'll see in a bit the color of the cartridge is different from the regular retail release. Here's the back of the box, which also, I believe, features different text because at the top it's talking about how nearly 2 million players have taken the challenge, meaning, you know, 2 million people have played it already, so since it is a re-release, I think they threw that extra copy in right here. Interesting stuff, though. But what's really the difference between the classic series other than, you know, these red marks and some text changes? Well, the biggest one is the cartridge itself, which I will also show on the side. Typically, the Zelda cartridges on the NES were gold, shiny gold, and the re-releases were gray. And I said this on my unboxing, I'm not gonna lie, there's something about the gray I'm like really... and I'm stumbling over my words here. I'm really torn on it because when it comes to the SNES, I really enjoyed the games like Doom and Maximum Carnage and Killer Instinct, which I think are actually the only 3 retail releases that were different colors. And don't get me wrong, I like the gold cartridges. They really do stand out. They're very iconic, but I don't know. There's something about the gray versions of the Zelda games that have always appealed to me more. I have no idea why. So in a way, I'm kind of glad that I got this. My copy of the first Zelda is gold. I actually did have a gray copy, but I sold it because I'm not a variant collector, guys. You know what I mean? If I can make a little bit of extra money on a game that it's technically a double, I will. So I sold it off a while ago. But that back in the sleeve. And, you know, I gave you guys the opening story comic. But we'll go through this a little bit with you guys here. I'll pick out some things that are kind of interesting. So the first 2 pages after the opening cutscene / comic say, the vast Hyrule is the stage for the adventure. There are 6 palaces hidden in Hyrule. Link must gain experience by fighting Ganon's underlings and get information while visiting towns here and there. And after defeating the guardians at the palaces of Death Valley, he must obtain the Triforce of Courage. That is Link's mission. And then it shows a map of, it's basically the first area of the game, essentially, because it shows the port in Mido Town, but it doesn't show you Eastern Hyrule. And then, it's pretty standard stuff, guys. I'm not going to go through everything here. It pretty much, you know, gives you the overview of the HUD and how to play the game and the different terrains, the different enemy encounters that you can get to, so on and so forth. Leveling and experience, which I'll get into a little bit more soon. The different types of enemies that you could find in the different areas of the game. What happens when you die and have to use a continue. Going over fairies and the weapons that enemies use in the game. And then the conversations that you could have in town, including some hidden stuff here and there. But I did want to do a focus on one of the later sections. I will read through. Actually, this one's pretty cool. We'll do a quick focus on this. So, I'll show you real quick and then in better detail over on the side. Game data and manual for your adventures, map to the first palace. So pretty much this map is a hand-drawn map, which I love. Very vibrant with the colors of basically your starting point in the North Castle, and then your first few towns that you go to, Rauru Town and Ruto Town, as well as the path to the first palace. And a couple of caves and stuff are marked, ultimately leading down towards Death Mountain. It would be really cool, I don't know if this exists, but a whole hand-drawn version. I didn't really look at the Nintendo Power. I don't have the Nintendo Power volume with Zelda 2 in it. It might have more drawn stuff, but I do know that much like with a lot of Nintendo Power things, unless it's an official strategy guide, they cut you off towards the end. I do remember seeing that, so it doesn't show you everything. But pretty cool. I love the hand-drawn stuff, man. It's so cool, which I'm going to show you some more now. Going over the various spells that Link learns along in his quest. 8 in total. There are 8 types of magic that Link will be taught here and there in the towns. Use the magic by taking into consideration the remaining magic points that Link has. The points consumed by each magic of their various effects. Link might not be able to advance without using magic, which is true. Magic wears off if the display changes to another, which means if you scroll to another screen, like you'll lose your jump, you'll lose your shield, so on and so forth. You get 16 magic points per container. Think of how to use the magic by taking into account the number of vessels remaining. So, the game does like tell you how much each spell costs and stuff, but as you level up your magic and get more containers, it's a little confusing, and I feel like unless you've played the game a lot and kind of just memorize like with your eyes, you won't truly know how much stuff you have left. I kind of wish there was a more designated MP system where it said like, oh, this costs this is how much magic you have left. Like it'll say on the HUD, it'll say magic, whatever your level is, and then it'll it'll show below the amount of blocks or whatever that you have. And I kind of wish that they could have fit a number somewhere. I feel like there's possibly going to be a hack for that. I haven't really looked too deep into the Zelda 2 hacks, but I think it would be something kind of quality of life change that doesn't really drastically alter the game by any means, you know what I mean? Same would go for life too. It'd be interesting to see just how much damage certain enemies do to you, you know what I mean? So then you can kind of plot things out a little bit easier. Because as the manual said, there's going to be a lot of areas where you have to use magic in order to complete. So let's get into the spells. The first spell that you get is the shield spell. Raises Link's life level temporarily, reduces damage inflicted by the enemy by half. This magic is important while Link's level is low. So shield is honestly probably the most important spell throughout the game, as it reduces damage. So pretty much like if you know you're about to go into a boss fight or a really tough room or something, just cast shield and it will greatly reduce your damage. And obviously, if your life level's high, in certain instances you'll barely take any damage at all, which is great because life is very important. The next spell that you get is the jump spell. Using this magic increases Link's jumping power. He could even climb to heights he could not reach with a normal jump. Jump is also very important. It's needed in order to advance the game. One of the caves leading to Death Mountain, right? Or at the beginning of Death Mountain, one or the other. After Rudo Town, you literally need it in order to advance. It also comes into play quite a bit throughout the game. In certain tough platforming areas with flying enemies and stuff, if you have jump equipped, you might be able to jump over them, which is very helpful. The next spell that you get is Life. This can recover Link's life points, but only to a certain extent. You should use this magic before all is lost. So, one of the main strategies with Life, obviously, it heals you. But, like, for example, if you have blue or red magic vial drops in front of you, and you don't have your life topped off and you know the life spell, cast Life, pick up the vials. It's just a tip that'll get you through the game. Next, do you actually get Fairy next? Why do I feel like that's incorrect? Well, I'm gonna go in the order that this is written. I feel like Fairy might be next. I think Fairy was next. Yeah, it was. Magic which makes you a fairy, you could fly by using this. Those of you who have a hard time in dangerous terrain, such as cliffs, should use this magic. So, there's certain instances of the game where you need to cast Fairy in order to fly up, like, through a crevice, or to get up through a ledge that even Jump can't reach. But also, it is very useful in tough platforming segments. If you don't really trust your abilities to get through, just cast Fairy and sort of fly towards the top. You can still take damage while as a fairy, but you can't get hit into the pit and die. Also, very important, if you are about to get hit and die, pitfalling, and you know the fairy spell, if you could menu quick enough and cast the fairy spell, you could actually save yourself, which is very interesting. In my second no-death run attempt, which ended up dying at the road to the Great Palace, I almost died in one of the other palaces, but I cast Fairy before I fell into the pit, and I survived. Next, we have the Fire spell, which is, pretty much, well, I guess I'll read it first. When this button is used, you can throw a fireball while swinging a sword using the B button. There are bound to be some enemies that hate this fire. So basically what that means is certain enemies can only be damaged by fire. That's really all it is. I find the more that I play the game, I barely even use it. A lot of the enemies that can only be damaged by fire, I'll just kind of straight up skip it, to be honest with you. Next we have the Spell. Magic to cast eerie spells. Its effect is still not fully known. It is also said that it'll make the enemy tremble in fear. So, when you cast a spell, there's two main reasons for it. You can cast it towards one of the later towns in order to get the, I think it was the infinite key for the dungeons. It raises like a tower out of the ground, but otherwise, like, it'll turn tougher enemies into wimpier enemies, so it'll turn like flying enemies into like bots or like the blobs. So it can be very useful, but I actually find that I don't use it much outside of the intended use, which is to get the key. Next, we have the Reflect spell, a mysterious magic that could bounce back magic cast by magicians in the palace. Usually shields only deflect a magician's magic, so another spell I don't use very often. I'll just kind of try to avoid magic spells throughout the palaces when I can. However, the one boss, I believe its name is Karak, which is the magician. You cast Reflect, and then bounce the spell back upon it to kill it. So it is very, very useful, and I think necessary. Can you attack Karak without Reflect? I don't know if you can. I haven't really tried it, to be honest with you, but even if you could, not worth it. Lastly, the Thunder spell, I touched on that earlier. The most powerful of the 8 magics that can damage all the enemies on the screen. However, Link has to be very strong in order to use it, so you need to have a certain magic level in order to even get it. And you get the Thunder spell, I believe, in Old Kasuto Town, the one that's ravaged by ghosts on the way to the Great Palace. Thunder, as it says, is a very powerful spell. However, I've never used it outside of its true intended use, which is to break down the barrier of the Thunderbird at the end, the last boss before Dark Link, in order to damage it. So pretty interesting stuff. And we got some more stuff here. Go over it really quickly with you guys. It is the items and stuff that you'll find throughout the game. Emphasis on quick. I don't want to bore you too much. Magic jars, basically they replenish Link's magic points. Treasure bags, denoted with P, give out extra experience points, which are dropped by enemies, and sometimes you find them in secret areas. Heart containers raise the overall life, same with the magic container, but for magic. You will also find Link dolls throughout the overworld and sometimes in palaces, and they give you a 1-up, basically. However, when you pick them up, they're gone forever. So, like, let's say you pick up a Link doll, and then you use a continue, and you go back to the spot where you found a Link doll, it won't be there anymore. So keep that in mind. And then, lastly, we have the items, basically, that help you throughout your quest. Tools, whatever you want to call them. First is the candle. When this is obtained, places that you had not been able to see until now because of the dark are lit up. I believe the candle is not necessary, however, it is very, very much encouraged, unless you are a true gaming god. The hammer, it could break rocks and cut down trees on the landscape map. Use it with the A button. So the hammer is very important. It leads to some pretty cool stuff, as well as the hidden town of New Kasuto, which you need to cut down trees, which I was a little confused about in my first playthrough, because to me it's like a hammer cuts down a tree. Isn't that weird? Wouldn't you think it's like an axe or some kind of like blade or something? But either way, yeah, you can cut down various trees on the landscape using the A button, which is interesting. Next you have the handy glove. Use this to break blocks in the palaces by swinging the sword. Pretty self-explanatory. The raft, when you get this, you can cross the sea from the dock. What's on the other side of the sea? Eastern Hyrule, basically the last half of the game. The boots, according to legend, it is said that when you put on these boots you can do something extraordinary, which is walk on water. So you can take a couple shortcuts here and there, but ultimately this is to get to the Ocean Palace, which one of my no-death runs unfortunately ended at. The flutes, you will play the legendary mysterious music of Hyrule. The sound rouses old powers. The main use for this is to get rid of the River Devil feature that's on the overworld, preventing you from getting south on Eastern Hyrule. And then ultimately, it unveils the hidden palace in between the 3 stone blocks or whatever they are. The magical key, a magical key that can open several of the locked doors. That's the one that you have to use the spell at the end of the one town in order to get. And then lastly, the cross, with its secret power, you'll be able to see enemies which you can't normally see. So you'll be able to see the enemies in Old Kasuto Town, and I believe some of the enemies through the final palaces, if I remember correctly. That's pretty important, actually. Probably necessary too. I don't really know. Not a super duper expert on Zelda 2, so I can't tell you what's exactly needed and what's not. I think there's a few things that you can skip, but the majority of them you do need, and they're recommended. So that's pretty much the breakdown of the story, the box, the manual, and all that good stuff. So I kind of wanted to get into a few things here. I'm going to kind of go over some Zelda 2 reviews and receptions. So let me go ahead and pop up my interwebs here. We're going to be doing a little bit on the fly, so bear with me. Got to do some adjustment. There we are. So we're going to take a look at the top here. I don't know who Game Skinny is, but I touched on it earlier. I kind of feel like the Zelda 2 reception over the years has been very up and down, and I feel like this is a good example of it. So IGN gave it an 8.5 out of 10, and whoever Game Skinny is gave it an 8 out of 10. And I feel like those are pretty fair scores. Now, the one score that actually sticks out to me, and you might be saying, well, it's not that low. That's the 7 out of 10 from, I'm trying to highlight it here and it won't let me, from Nintendo Life. I give up on the highlight. Now, the reason why this sticks out to me is Nintendo Life is, like, notoriously known for being Nintendo simps. I like Nintendo Life, but they pretty much just, like, jack off anything Nintendo. So the fact that they gave this a 7... I feel like if they were a true impartial reviewer, they probably would have given it like a 6 or a 5.5. That actually is a little bit startling to me, because in no way, shape, or form should Nintendo Life score be that low, and I found that to be pretty interesting. And now I wanted to go to the user reviews of GameFAQs. I know, you're probably like, why? But that's what we're gonna do. So we're just going to kind of scroll through briefly here. As you're going to see, the years vary from the early 2000s, and there's a few of them, or later years. I saw 2018 on here. So you got a couple 10s, which is, I feel like, a little too generous. You know how users are. It's like, oh my god, I love it, best game ever, or it's like, this game sucks. See, 7, I feel like this is interesting, not a bad game, but is it a good Zelda game? Yeah, in 2003, I feel like that's a more relevant topic, but back in the day, probably not, because there's only 2 to compare it to at the time. Lots of 10s, 9s, and 8s. But here we go, we're gonna start seeing some of the lower scores now. The demented black sheep of the Zelda series, and I did mention that Zelda 2 is seen as a black sheep because it's so different. Again, this review by Drizzt, a Dungeons & Dragons aficionado, I assume. I don't know how to pronounce the name. Is it Drizzt? Drizzt? But I know that he's from D&D and Baldur's Gate and stuff. From 2007, so again, a lot of Zelda games came out by then, so it's easier to look back on and go, what the hell is this? And that's kind of how I looked at it at first, too, because by the time that I first discovered Zelda 2, it's probably already in the N64 era, or A Link to the Past, one or the other. Or Link's Awakening, even. Not quite sure. And as you can see, we're starting to get down. Looks like a lot of 08-07 era stuff, people hating on it. Got a 3 here. The opposite of the original, yet ends up being just as tedious. Ooh, this person must not like the original either. That's a little rough. Crime and Punishment. Lots of 7s and 8s now. We're starting to dip out of the 10s. Here's a more modern review. A hardcore Zelda game for the hardcore Zelda fans. And I do kind of agree with that. The score sucks. I'm not going to read the reasoning. The 5 is absurd. I'm assuming that the person's complaining about the difficulty of the game, which I can totally understand. I really can. Got some more full reviews here. As you can see, it's I would say overall positive, and I feel like in general, yeah, the reception is positive, but a lot of people over the years have been turned off by the stark contrast of Zelda 2 compared to the rest of the games in the series. Zelda 2, hang your head in shame. Now, again, I'm picking out a lot of the, you know, the critical reviews here. As you can see, most of them are green, or at the very least, like in the 7s. Looks like it's a pretty bad stretch here in the early 2000s. Interesting. Terrible excuses. Skip to Zelda 3. I feel like it's just very misunderstood. And part of the reason why I think it's misunderstood is because it tried to be different. I'm a huge fan of Simon's Quest as well. And Simon's Quest tried to be different. But look at the theme of the era. A lot of games try to be different with their sequels, and I feel like probably similar reception was had throughout it. So obviously you got Zelda to Zelda 2, very different. You got Castlevania to Simon's Quest, very different. Mario to Mario 2, which we know the real Mario 2 wasn't released in America. It's the Lost Levels. It's really Doki Doki Panic reskinned, but that's what we got here. So that's what we're going off of. Very, very different from the original. I feel like there's another couple that are different. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head here. Those are the 3 that really stick out to me. Because there's a bunch of series like, you know, Contra to Super C, very similar. I guess Turtles to Turtles 2 is very different as well, because Turtles 2 was the arcade game, where Turtles 1 is that very... I don't even know how to explain it. I love Turtles 1, by the way, but it's very different. You switch between your characters, it's all side-scrolling, there's different segments. You know what I mean? It's, in a way, Turtles... I feel like Turtles 1 is like the Zelda 2 of the Turtles franchise, because I feel like it started to get to more just straight beat-em-up arcadey style as it went along with 2, 3, Turtles in Time, and Hyperstone Heist even. Turtles 1 is definitely the black sheep of the series, but that one came out first, so... But it is very interesting to look back at and see that, you know, Zelda 2 can be very easily misunderstood, especially in recent days. You know, people just writing it off, going like, what the hell is this? You know, trying to introduce somebody new to it, like me, really. A lot of people might be turned off by it, but I liked it. And why did I like it? Well, we'll get into that more later. But first, I wanted to read some more stuff to you guys. We're going to read the brief excerpt from the Bitmap books, RPG book. So granted, I'll kind of get into this more with my breakdown at the very end. Is Zelda an RPG? I've said it was in the past, but as the years have gone on, no, Zelda is not an RPG. The only Zelda game, to my knowledge, that's an actual RPG is this one. Why? To me, an RPG has to be an adventure-style game. It does not need to be turn-based. However, if it's turn-based random encounters, obviously you're an RPG. Like, it's pretty much like, that's the brandish, the mark. You know, you're brandishing the mark of the RPG, JRPG right there with that instantly. But in a way, yeah, Zelda 2 has that too, actually, but why do I think Zelda 2 is an RPG? You level up, simply. There is build variety. Unfortunately, you max out at 888 across the board, but it's an RPG, guys. Alright, so I will pop this stuff up on the screen to you. So, since I said that Zelda isn't really an RPG, they actually didn't break down all the games here. They broke down the Zelda series as a whole. But they do talk about the Zelda 2 sequel in here, so I'm trying to find it. Okay, here we go. Ah, perfect. Let me find a good perfect starting point here. I just found out the stuff that I was pretty much talking about. Okay, here we go. And while the Zelda story started to become more complex with Ocarina of Time for the N64, they still weren't as involved as games like Final Fantasy or even Dragon Quest. So again, the popular understanding of what RPG meant evolved, but Zelda didn't evolve with it. And such RPG elements as did exist were so simplified as to no longer qualify. The exception here is Zelda II, The Adventure of Link for the NES, a massive departure from the original game. It was obviously influenced by Dragon Quest, including a similar looking overworld which is combat-free, used solely for travel. Whenever you enter towns, caves, or castles, or encounter a foe in the overworld map, the game switches to a side-scrolling perspective for the action. Unlike the original Zelda game, Zelda 2 has towns as well as an experience system, so you could upgrade your health, magic, or attack power. Armor and sword upgrades are not present, but there is a relatively wide assortment of magic spells. The dungeons, now represented as castles, are gigantic mazes focused on combat and exploration. Unlike the original, there is no in-game map, rather than puzzle solving. All these are still considered role-playing elements, even in the modern definition. Since it's so different, it's not popular with the series fans, which I was kind of talking about, but as an 8-bit action RPG, it's excellent. Combat is challenging but rewarding, and while it is difficult, it's not really much harder than many other games of the era, and it's less obscure than games like Castlevania 2 or Legacy of the Wizard, which I will agree. Castlevania 2, untranslated, like unmodified, unhacked, the way that we got it, is very confusing, unless you're using a guide. And same with Legacy of the Wizard, that's way more confusing than even Castlevania 2 in my opinion. Alright, so let's kind of wrap things up here with my thoughts, my little review. Touched on it a lot. What are my final thoughts on Zelda 2? I love it. I think it's great. If you had to put a gun to my head, now I want to point out that I've only played through Zelda 1, I've beaten that like 3 or 4 times. Zelda 2, which now I've beaten it 3 times. Yeah, first playthrough, practice run, and then my no death was the 3rd full time I beat it. I got really far in the other runs, but obviously I died, so I reset. And I played A Link to the Past once, and I dicked around with Link's Awakening, the original, but I never beat it. If you had to put a gun to my head, Zelda 1 or Zelda 2? As much as I love Zelda 2, and as much as I love RPGs, I probably would still go with Zelda 1, but Zelda 2 needs to be talked about more. Zelda 2 needs a reboot. Zelda 2 needs a remake. Could you imagine Zelda 2, like, remade properly? Now, obviously, how do you do it? Do you do 2D HD? Do you do a 3D remake? I don't know. But the formula would be ripe for a remake. And I love Zelda 2. I love when game series and developers decide to go out of their comfort zone, which again, was there really a comfort zone yet? Probably not. It was only the 2nd game in the series at the time. But considering they went back to the original formula for the rest of the times, basically, very, very admirable. And I feel like they did a wonderful job with it. And the RPG elements arguably make the game a little bit more replayable. Now, I say that with a little bit of holdback, because since I did say the levels cap out at 888, yes, there's build variety, but you get an instant level by placing the gems in the palaces. You also organically are able to level up quite a bit, so more often than not, even without grinding, you will probably reach 888, especially if it's your first playthrough and you don't really know where you're going exactly. But there is build variety, meaning like at least like for the early, mid, and close to the end game, you know, like I personally like to level up my attack before everything else, just because it makes the game easier. Some people might want a ton of life, or some people might want a ton of magic, which is very interesting because that's not like how it is in any other Zelda game. And I love the overworld into the random encounter type of, you know, deal that they got going on, because as a big RPG fan, it makes me feel at home. And honestly, the combat in ways it's simplistic, but it's also kind of in depth. certain enemies require certain patterns. You know, some of them are better with downward thrusts. Some of them you have to jump and hit their head. Some of them you gotta play footsie with them, so to speak, a fighting game turn where, you know, they have a shield, so you gotta go low, high, low, high, low, high. Certain enemies, like the blue iron knuckles that throw the daggers or whatever, I still don't really understand how to beat them consistently without getting hit, but there's strategies for so many different enemies in this game that it really, along with, you know, the leveling up and the town exploration and talking to people and finding secrets, there's so many little elements that play into this to make it just one. It's one of the best games on the NES. I really have to think long and hard about where would it sit in my NES pantheon. I would say, honestly, it's top 20. I might be able to squeak it into my top 15 or even my top 10, but I really have to sit down and think about it. I truly believe that this series was probably went in the right direction, if we're being honest. Because I love the first Zelda. The first Zelda and Link to the Past and all those games are great. You know what I mean? Like, that formula is true, tried, and tested, and it worked. But, God, if they could just remake Zelda 2, or come out with another style game similar to that, like, think about a sequel to Zelda 2. I guess, what, The Adventure of Link 2? Imagine that with, like, modern technology, man. An actual Zelda RPG in the modern days would be perfect. Now, take that with a grain of salt as well. I've never played Breath of the Wild. I haven't played any of the newer games, so I don't know if any of those games are like that. I'm just kind of going off of my prior knowledge here. I don't want to rant too much, but Zelda 2 deserves more respect. In my opinion, it's just as good as the first Zelda game. It's just different. And I think that turns off a lot of people, but I'm a fan of different. I love Simon's Quest. I love TMNT. You know what I mean? Like, these are games that appeal to me. I like when things are not just the same thing over and over and over, because honestly, guys, it gets stale. Like, I have a tough time playing through game series that are very, very similar. Like, as much as I love Final Fantasy, if you guys have noticed, I haven't played through 1 through 10, like, back to back to back to back to back. I need a little bit of variety. And how much better is it when the variety exists within your own series? I don't have to switch to a different series. Zelda 1 to Zelda 2, and then back to Link to the Past. I think it was the third release, right? I think Link's Awakening came out after that. Perfect. And, you know, modernizing it a bit, going from Dark Souls to Dark Souls 2 to me is such a vast difference that it keeps things fresh for me. And then you go back to Dark Souls 3 after 2, which is more like 1, kind of, you know what I'm saying? Keeps things fresh, allows you to more bingeability, if you will. I would be remiss if I did not mention this stuff. I wanted to talk about it a little bit. I know it's a little bit out of place, but also, my mouse died on top of exit. Please don't exit. Okay, good. Sometimes my mouse shuts off with inactivity, and sometimes it lands on top of, like, weird stuff in OBS, and I'm like, please don't, please don't. I wanted to go over this real quick, and I know it's kind of odd to end it on, but I felt like it was pretty cool to look at. And that is different regional differences between the Zelda 2 games. So Zelda 2, I believe, was originally released on the Famicom disk system. And then obviously we got it way later. So let's go ahead and make this a little bit bigger for you guys. So you can see the different title screens. Yeah, Japan, US, and Europe. And I believe, yeah, Japan only came out on the disk system. I need to get it on the disk system, by the way. Interesting stuff. Differences in copy, obviously, which you could expect with things being translated and dumbed down. So I thought this was very interesting, actually. One of the main reasons I wanted to show it to you guys. The website, by the way, is thecuttingroomfloor.net. If any of you don't know it, it's a great site for, like, betas, alphas, cut content, stuff like that. The Famicom disk system version, when you die, it just says Return of Ganon in the end. Just black screen. But in the US version, on the NES, you actually see Ganon, which I thought was an interesting touch because, like I said, Ganon's not really in the game. It's just the threat of Ganon and the threat of his revival. Now, I assume when you die, you're able to sprinkle the bad guys are able to sprinkle Link's blood, and that's why Ganon revives. But I think it's definitely more ominous in our version. Looks like he's kind of almost looks like he's like naked, right? So he's probably like getting real gritty here. He was revived by Link's blood and then just fucking ding-a-ling swinging out and stuff. But I thought that was pretty interesting. Of course, you're going to have minor sprite differences. Honestly, the NES version looks like it's a little bit more detailed. It's kind of hard to see. Look at the difference here in Zelda's Chamber. I thought this was pretty interesting. Definitely a little bit easier on the eyes in the NES version. Zelda 2, one of the problems I have with it is some of the palaces and stuff with these repeating blocks, they really hurt your eyes when they scroll. This was very interesting, actually. I'm actually going to try to zoom in for this for you guys. And then I got to remember to zoom out. So these are the encounters in the Disk System version compared to ours. Look how similar they are. They definitely did a better job by like differentiating them in the NES version. Like this smaller enemy encounter, bigger, and fairy. The fact that the fairy is the same sprite but a different color, this is really weird. I don't know why they did that. Is it like ghosts or something? I don't know. I think they did a great job at redoing them for the NES though. Very weird. Here it is, as you can see, in action on the Famicom Disk System version. It just doesn't even look as good, you know what I mean? It's not as ominous as the black figures, the black blobs. Some other minor differences here between sprites for the trophies and this one's funny actually. So in the Famicom Disk System version, the child's like tied up, but in the NES version he's just lost. And I get why they did that, because again, the NES is a family system, which again is kind of weird that they would talk about, you know, Link's blood being sprinkled. Anyway, so this is cool. There's a Dragon Quest reference in the Famicom Disk System version. So, here lies Lodo the Hero is the translation, which is Erdrick from Dragon Warrior, Dragon Quest, as you can see here. It's pretty cool. And then, as you know, Squaresoft joined in as well, where in Final Fantasy they had the Here Lies Link in the Japanese version, and then in the English release, Here Lies Erdrick. So there was a lot of like Easter egg and trolling going on amongst the game series at the time, which I always thought was pretty cool. Some more minor differences here. Let me zoom back out for you guys. There we go. The River Devil is actually different in the Famicom Disk System version as well. It's more like a big brown, almost like Yeti creature, like a Sasquatch, where ours is kind of like a bridge spider. And here is the building I was talking about that you raise up out of the ground with a spell to get the key in Kasuto. Some texture differences there. I feel like ultimately they made the right choice in the NES version, like I said. Some more differences as we go along. Oof, you can just see this. Doesn't that hurt your eyes? And it looks like experience points were actually different in the different versions as well. Huh. Oh, so the Geldarms in the desert give you 10 in the Disk System version. That's actually very interesting. I wonder how that plays into speedruns. I mean, I'm sure not too much, because speedrunners have things routed out so properly that it doesn't really matter too much, but it is definitely very, very interesting stuff. As you can see, Karak's sprite has changed between the versions. One of the very interesting things to discuss here is we get, what's his name, Guma? Yeah, Guma in the 5th Palace. It's actually not, he's not in the Famicom Disk System version. It's another version of Helmet Head. Weird, right? So pretty much they just recycled a boss, but then they made a new one for the NES version. I don't know why they didn't just do that in the original. Recycling bosses is lazy as hell. As a Dark Souls fan, I could admit it's lazy as hell. And I think Guma is actually one of the more interesting bosses of the game, because you attack him in his stomach, which is very different. Most of the bosses and enemies in the game you attack at their head. I think he was a good addition for sure. Minor differences here with Barba. And then, as you can see, the palace. I like the Famicom Disk System version of the falling floors here. They were definitely more differentiated, which I think helps. Some more stuff. It's mostly sprites, but there are, as you can see, there was a different boss. There's some different experience, and some of the sprites are very, very different. You know, the overworld stuff is very much a deviation. But yeah, I just wanted to show that stuff to you guys. Here's the level threshold. Some minor differences across the way. Same with the sound, but I'm not going to play those. But definitely stuff to consider. I would actually highly recommend any fans of the series play through the Disk System version, just because it is different, you know what I mean? It's a little bit of a different experience. I actually think I might do that. I might make that my next playthrough of Zelda 2, whenever that might be. I'll play through the Disk System version just to kind of see and compare. It'd be very fun. Anyways, guys, that's it for the 3rd episode of the Bitscast. Hope you guys enjoyed it. At times, I know I could be a little bit rambly here. I'm trying my best to stay on course and make sure that things are interesting, informational, and entertaining. You know, I kind of have a little bit of a script and then I sort of wing it, you know what I mean? I don't sit here for days practicing things out and stuff like that. You know, it's not an official show. But I hope you guys did enjoy it. And if you did enjoy this, please make sure to check out all my other Zelda 2 content if you haven't already. My first playthrough, my no death runs, my unboxing, and I think I might also have a meme video up. I think I will. So if you guys enjoyed all that stuff, make sure to like everything. Comments on this, I do my best to reply to all comments on videos, and subscribe if you haven't already. We're getting close to 1,000 subs, baby. We finally monetize this stuff and make my $3 a month. But anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in future videos, and as well as the 4th episode of Bitscast, which should hopefully be coming in the next month or so. Take care, and I'll see you then.